to let you know, we're all very grateful that everybody is here. My name is Elodia Thomas. I'm chair of the Community Preservation Committee. Maria is here as well. She's on the CONCOM, which is the Conservation Commission, and is also a member of the committee. We're here just to get smart, listen to you, hear your ideas. But everybody in here represents a different entity in Watertown that we feel are key stakeholders or people who are involved with key community groups that are important to make the CPA successful. As you know, the funding can go to affordable housing, open space, outdoor recreation, and historic preservation. So I can't say how much, especially in these crazy times we're in, that you came. Lene Handy, many of you have already met. She is our new coordinator. She's been with us, she's part-time, she's been with us since mid-December. She has a lot of experience working in Boston and has a master's in city planning from MIT. And Avery Wolf is here representing Goldson Associates. She's going to be our facilitator. And again, thank you, and let's get on with our show.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you everybody for coming. As Elodie just said, I'm Avery Wolf. I'm from the JM Goldson consultant team. We're working with the CPC to develop their community preservation plan. And this is one of the really vital pieces of the process to get input from you and other stakeholders in the community to help develop a set of goals and think about potential project ideas that the CPA could fund. So we've got a pretty tight agenda tonight. We want to squeeze everything we can into an hour. So we'll try to stick to that, and I will ask that you guys kind of be mindful of the time. We are going to have a designated time for discussion. So throughout, if you have questions or thoughts that come up while I'm giving my presentation pieces, I would encourage you to write them down. If you need to, you can tear off this front page, or on the back there's a nice note section. And you can just jot down your notes so that when we do have discussion later, you can ask those questions. So we'll start out with just doing some brief intros. I want everybody to know, everybody in the room, it's probably mostly for me. A lot of you probably know each other already. But if you could just say your name and what interest or entity you're here representing tonight. And if there's anything specific that you're looking forward to, that would be really helpful if we can just do a lightning round.
So I'm Joyce Kelly. I'm here from the Historical Society of Watertown, and I'm interested in historic preservation.
Marilyn Roach, apparently I'm representing the Historic Commission, which meets tonight, but I'm also a member of the Historical Society.
She's the president.
Yeah, preservation.
I'm Jan Singer. I'm Executive Director of the Watertown Community Foundation, and I'm interested in everything.
I'm Jill Clemens. I'm the Supervisor of Adult and Reference Services at the library. I'm also interested in all of it, although obviously I have a slight vested interest in the historic preservation piece.
Michael Lahr, I'm the Executive Director of Watertown Housing Authority, and interested in very, very interested in this conversation.
I'm Leo Martin. I'm from the Conservation Commission. I'm sort of leaning on open space, just a little bit, not a lot. But I'm certainly interested. We have a lot of needs, so I think we hopefully we help multiple areas with this money.
Mark Sedaris, Town Council President, interested in all of the above.
All right. So I'm going to give a quick overview of CPA. I don't know, can I just show of hands how many people in this room feel like they're really comfortable with CPA, know a lot about it? Okay, so there's some mixed. So some of this stuff you might already know. I'm just going to kind of go over the basics, give you a little background to set the context for the discussion. And then we'll move into an activity where you guys will have a chance to write down some project ideas. Just silently, I'll have you do that on your own. We'll put them up on these boards, and then we'll use that as a launching point for our discussion. And then we have another activity at the end that, again, will just kind of be a silent jot down of ideas that we can take back with us. So without further ado, let's get started. If you want to follow along with your packet, this is just some helpful information to have in front of you, and you guys can take this into home with you too. So the first page after the notes is just a quick overview of our project schedule. So in the fall, we were really just getting started, kicking off, getting to know the CPC members. We did a community tour to get to know the town a little bit. And we created these community preservation resource profiles, which are at the back of your packet. And they just give kind of a snapshot in time of some of the resources based on the 4 CPA eligible categories. So I encourage you guys to look over that material, later when you go home and definitely think about it. And as you're thinking of project ideas, you can absolutely reference those later when we're doing the activities. Right now, we are working on identifying issues, opportunities, and priorities for the future. And specifically, you'll see we're looking at gathering input from town officials and stakeholders, which is you guys. We did have our first community forum at the end of January, which was a great success. And we do have a community survey that's live right now. So I encourage you guys, one thing I realized I did not do is provide the email or the website link and survey link for this. So I can write that up at the end, and I will encourage you guys to take a look if you haven't already. Go on, take the survey, take a look at our project website, because those are really great resources. We have a second forum scheduled for April, but right now it is suspended, and we will probably be rescheduling, but that's something on the horizon that we're thinking about. We really want to make sure that this process is community-based and that the community has a lot of opportunity to not only get information about CPA and the CPC and this project, but also to really inform the plan and the goals and priorities for the CPC. So that will be the rest of the project at the end of the summer and into the fall. Is really just going through all of the data and information that we've collected and compiling that into a plan with very specific goals and guiding principles, as well as preparing an application process and application materials to start the first round of funding. Turn around here. The next page just gives you a sense of how CPA funds are allocated. So as you can see, 10% of annual funds or annual revenue must be designated, either spent or set aside for allocation in the 3. It's a little bit confusing because open space and recreation is, for the purposes of funding, is lumped into one category, but because they are really separate uses in a lot of ways, sometimes they can be combined, but sometimes they are very separate. In these kinds of planning processes, we really like to separate them out so that we can get a sense of those different needs. So for funding, it's 3 different categories. It's community housing, historic preservation, and open space and or recreation. And then the remaining 70%, generally speaking, is just undesignated funds that the CPC and the community can choose how to spend. The one little caveat to that is that 5%, up to 5%, can be spent on admin costs. So people like your CPA coordinator and consulting services like this, or any other admin expenditures that the CPC has to put forward. So the next page goes over how someone would apply for CPA funds. First of all, a lot of people think that the CPC is the one that initiates the project ideas and initiates the projects, but really there has to be an outside entity that takes ownership for the project and is really managing the project and applying for those funds from the CPC. So it all starts with an idea, which is what we're doing right now, coming up with project ideas, and that project idea is proposed or thought about with a group of people. Someone takes ownership of it and decides to go forward with it. Step 2, if the project applicant is not the landowner or the property owner themselves, they need to negotiate with the property owner and get their permission. So say a community group sees a tract of land and they say, this is not being used, we really want to apply for CPA funds to build a park. They have to go then find out who owns that land and talk to them and figure out if it's something they can do, obviously. Step 3 is to come to the CPC and apply for those funds, which is usually a 2-step process where there's an initial idea presented to the CPC, and they can discuss it and ask for some more information, and then come back with a more fleshed out application. The CPC then reviews and votes on those applications. Sometimes there's enough funding, and the CPC thinks that all projects are, eligible and really good ideas, and so they can just fund all the projects. But sometimes there are more projects than they can actually fund in that round, and so that's where some prioritization comes in. And there's a question about how does the CPC then make those decisions. And then step 5, so that the CPC then votes to recommend the allocation of those funds for that project, which then goes to town council, which is voted on at town meeting. So that's that. Now I want to get into eligibility. So as I said, again, in this case, the different, buckets or categories of eligible projects is separated into 4. The open space and recreational uses are separated out. So for community housing, also I would like to say that this matrix was prepared first by the CPA Coalition, and this is an adapted version that Newton did, which has this additional information and a few extra pieces. So there's some stuff on here that's specific to Newton only, but I do think it's a really great and very useful tool. So I just wanted to put that out there, that it's not our work. For community housing, CPA funds can be used, and I will define community housing as for low and moderate income households, and that is defined as less than or equal to families or households that make less than or equal to 100% of the area median income. And
Isn't it 80%?
for this, it's for CPA, it's a little bit different. And communities can choose to set their standard lower than that in order to make sure that any new housing units used with CPA funds actually are registered on the subsidized housing inventory. Communities can choose to limit it to at or below 80%, but to be eligible for CPA funding, it's at or below 100%. So CPA funds can be used to acquire affordable housing units, to create affordable housing units, to preserve them, to support them, or to rehabilitate them. So this is the only category that CPA funds can be used for any of these purposes. So acquire could be, someone donates a house, grants it over to the town, or to a managing agency. It could be that the town decides to purchase a unit. Creation, obviously that's developing a new housing unit. The CPA does encourage that any creation be reuse of an existing building or infill development on an already developed, like a redevelopment on an already developed parcel. But that's not a baseline requirement, it's just a recommendation. Preservation is all about protecting from injury or harm. So it's one thing that CPA funds cannot be used for is maintenance. So preservation really is about if there's a giant leak in the roof that is threatening the integrity and the lifeblood of a housing unit, then CPA funds can be used for it. But if it's just, regular reslating for general maintenance purposes, that's not eligible. Support is a really unique category, which is really about providing direct support to these low and moderate income households. So it could be a direct assistance program, it could be rental assistance, could be write-downs or other forms of direct assistance. It also could be hiring a housing coordinator if the town doesn't already have one, anything like that. And then the last piece is rehabilitation or restoration, which this is really about capital improvements, and there is a caveat with this one that is it's only eligible if that unit was either acquired or created using CPA funds. So a housing unit that already exists that is not acquired or created with CPA funds is not eligible for rehabilitation. Historic resources, which is defined as a building, a structure, a vessel, any real property, document, or artifact that is either listed or eligible for listing on the State Register of Historic Places, or the alternative to that, if it's not listed on the State Register, is to have your local historic commission basically review the significance, the historic and cultural significance of that structure or property or resource, and have them deem it, significant to the point that it is a piece of preservation for the community, to put funds into protecting and preserving something that's really valuable. So for this category, CPA funds can be used to acquire, to preserve, again, which is about protecting from injury or harm, or to rehabilitate or restore. And most, I believe that most historic resource CPA projects are rehabilitation or preservation. There are several acquisitions, but I think that those are by far the most popular ones. Open space can be acquired, created, preserved, or rehabilitated if it was acquired or created using CPA funds. Rehabilitation, I think, really mostly applies to the passive recreation component of the open space category. And so it's hard to think of examples. I can't think of an example off the top of my head. And I was talking to my colleague the other day. I don't really know what rehabilitation would mean for open space, but it might mean something like, I guess it could be along the lines with preservation. It could be something like cleanup or dealing with invasive species control and stuff like that.
A restoration project,
Yeah.
a wetlands or a forest.
Yeah. And so those kinds of projects can often be counted under restoration and rehabilitation or preservation, depending on the specific language. And finally, recreational use, which is really for active and passive outdoor recreation, which could be gardens, trails, fields, sports fields, dog parks, pocket parks, playgrounds, that kind of thing. The one thing that CPA funds cannot be used for is indoor recreational facilities, stadiums, or dog or horse racing, or artificial turf. That's the one last thing that gets dealt with a lot. So CPA funds for recreational use can be used for acquisitions, creation, preservation, and rehabilitation. All right. So I think with that, I do want to open it up and see if anybody has pressing questions about eligibility or about the project or about CPA in general. No? Okay.
I have a question, actually. Would this include, or how would, like the two libraries that are sitting fallow and have been for a number of years, would they fit into a category here?
Yeah,
We only own one of the libraries.
Oh, one got sold, right,
Yes.
right. On
Sorry.
Auburn, yeah, sorry.
And one thing I will say that it doesn't have to be something that's owned by the town. It can be, something that's owned by another entity, a private entity, an organization. The one thing is that CPA funds do have to be put towards something that is for the public good. So one thing that is required with any acquisition is that a preservation restriction be placed on that property. So it can be a historic preservation restriction, it can be a conservation restriction, it can be the affordability restriction for housing. But basically, and that is in perpetuity, so that's protecting and providing that, in both ways, protecting the investment in that use, but also kind of protecting the public good. But it is one thing that is, you know, you have to be really careful about with CPA funds, that whatever the use ends up being, there has to be a public benefit and a public use component. So it can't be like preservation for someone's private house. But in terms of those properties, I think that it could fall under, potentially under two categories. It would probably be under historic preservation, first and foremost, depending on what it was, what the reuse plan was for. It could be turned into, I mean, obviously I don't know the specifics, but it could be potentially turned into affordable housing or a community center, any of those kinds of things are on the table.
Thank you.
So with that, I think that I would like to just move into our activity. So I'm going to pass out. Does everybody have? Yes, absolutely. Would you mind just giving a quick introduction?
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry I'm late. I'm Ethan Davis. I am on the Watertown Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee.
Oh, great. I'm Avery Wolf. I'm from the James Goldson consultant team. So yeah, welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Thanks. So what I want you to do now, and you can use this cheat sheet as a guide, is to just brainstorm any project ideas that you have, and they can be in any of the categories. And I also don't want you to worry too much. If you're unsure about eligibility, write it down. If you're unsure about feasibility, write it down. I think that having ideas out in the open is the best way to move forward at this point, and we can always determine whether something is eligible or feasible down the road. The other thing that I will say about CPA eligibility is that it's not black and white at all. There are a lot of discussions out there about what is and isn't eligible. There are a lot of communities that have funded projects that aren't eligible, and there have been a handful of court cases around this that have kind of brought some things to light, but there's really not a lot of policing around it. And there is still a lot of discussion, and people are continually learning what is and isn't eligible. So in some cases, we just need more information, and really figuring out the details of all of that comes in the application process. So at this point, we're really just generating ideas to kind of help guide priorities and just start that brainstorming and collaborative thinking about what is the potential. So just start by writing down some ideas. I would recommend writing one idea per sticky note, and then I'll ask you to place them on whichever board up here you think is appropriate. And some projects might fall into several categories, so just choose whichever one you want to put it in. It doesn't really matter at this point. So I'll just start with that. I'll give you about 10 to 15 minutes to do this, and then we'll move into part 2. And if you have any questions at any point, feel free to come over and ask me or ask to the general room.
And we can just work together.
Absolutely, yeah. You can talk amongst yourselves.
And I'd like to encourage you to think about being creative and think about leveraging resources, and given some of the barriers in Watertown, like high cost of land and lots of developed nature of the town, just think about ways that maybe you could collaborate across the categories and leverage and forge some partnerships that can, you know, be very innovative.
Absolutely. Yes.
Could you ask the group if any of them could raise their hands if they were at the first public forum?
Yeah, absolutely. Was anyone at the forum? 1, 2, 4. Whenever the second forum is rescheduled, I encourage you all to come to that too. You'll have more opportunities to give input.
Are we supposed to write a specific project?
No, and that's actually one thing that I will say too is it doesn't have to be a specific project idea. If you think of just like a need in the community, something that you think you can't think of a specific parcel or property or a specific, a really specific idea, you can just talk about a general need or a more generic idea. We're leaving it pretty loose at this point. So whenever you're ready, you can start posting project ideas up there.
Can't get outside my wheelhouse though. I feel bad.
That's okay.
That's why you're here, because we value your expertise.
Have a chocolate. Might stimulate.
I'm dying to share.
Oh, yes, you're worried about your weight.
Yes, I love it.
Told you I was interested in everything.
It's okay. Go with your gut. So while you're putting ideas up here, I also would encourage you to look at the other ideas.
Next catch, Leah.
Yeah, be careful, they're a little bit precarious up there.
I had a problem last time.
Yeah, I encourage you to look at the other ideas that other people are putting up at the same time.
Oh, yes.
And if there are any that you feel like you really like, you think it's a really good idea, you can always add a little star or a check mark next to it on the sticky note.
Words have a mind of their own.
Maybe we should tape the tops of them. We thought about doing that. Sorry.
Well, it's just supposed to write on the sticky note?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
And I know that it's a little bit crowded in there.
Building already.
No, that's all right, we'll do it.
I agree, I mean,
Stays crazy for this.
I agree, I think it should be town archives.
Or whatever.
I think it's for, yeah.
Mike, I haven't seen you since you stopped by. Thanks again for that.
This is on my list too,
No
we got
problem.
two of the
Very
same
helpful.
one.
If you need anything
What,
else,
was
let
it
me
the
know.
original town
We got
record
the
books
furniture
that are in the
extended
town
below
clerk's
checks.
safety to
Let me
be
know.
preserved.
That's
Or
all
as somebody
discount.
else said,
That's what we
preserved
did.
like.
That's where it all went.
All
Perfect.
right, look at that, we have two of the
Just
same.
shake your hand, but the rules say we can't right now, yeah.
Yeah. If we're
Without
not doing
even
any of that.
consulting.
And I'm sure there are, 7 others.
You wrote
That's
something
you show
about the
appreciation
bill.
by now.
I did.
Yeah, there you go, that's the
Oh,
nice
you
thing to
did?
do, right?
Okay,
If
so,
you want to put them.
yeah, let's put it together.
Oh.
We had 48 hours, trust me.
So these are the same
Nothing
right
but,
here.
busy since it started.
Should we just
Love that.
together?
We have congregate,
Yeah, let's
we got high-rise elevator. So we had a call this morning with, the Department of Public Health Commissioner, whatchamacallit, the one who was on the news last night. Yeah, so she's saying to us, now what do you think? Keep operations running. But, we're asking specific questions, we have high-rise elevators. Very preliminary plans caution, what if it gets to us, what do we do? Are you gonna give some resources?
Your name.
I know it's day 1 or 2, but I think at least guarantee some
They were actually
resources.
working right now on the.
And so it was all the shelter
Okay.
directors and housing authority directors on the line at once. And she was just expressing us all this.
Unfortunately, what we're seeing,
Oh,
discussion
okay.
is,
Saw that.
the governor declared a state of emergency, but didn't give anybody any guidance.
There's no
What we should
teeth
do
that
next.
So the ponds.
So everybody's haphazardly and.
He's gotta give some stimulus
Tomorrow,
right
everybody's
away.
gonna blow up, I can tell you that right now.
Hopefully he said
Everybody's
it.
closing. Everybody's closing every
Yeah, they're Long Island there, yeah.
All
All right,
schools are
if
gonna be-
everyone has had a
Is that
chance,
school closed?
Oh, yes, I saw that.
can I get everybody's attention for a second? If everyone's had a chance to put their ideas up there and at least a little bit of time to review other project ideas, I heard some discussion starting, so I realized that I wanted to bring it back to the whole group. So I'm curious, as you were putting up your ideas, were there any, and it could be your own too, that you really want to talk about, are there any ideas that you're really excited about, or projects that you have questions about? I just want to open it up to discussion with the group.
I think everybody putting an idea up there is excited
I-
about their ideas.
Yes.
So all of those ideas are
Yes.
somewhat exciting.
Correct. You want to go first?
Yeah.
Did you have anything? So I'd like to, I have put a 3 or 4 up there, and one because I drove by the way. When I went in to vote the other day, I went by the Brown School, the Brown house, where the Brown House School used to be, and I noticed how in back of it was just like it could use sort of overgrown, It's just I did put that up there, Brown School, but it just seems like it's a historical home, and yet it's not really available to a lot of Watertown residents, only open 1 day a year. I think you said it was going to change.
2
too.
days a year it's
Yeah.
open, and it's a study house.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
Somebody lives there, I think.
Well, they have a caretaker.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so that was one of my things, but my primary item is to purchase and upgrade some property on the west end of town, adjacent to a pond, so it would be in the recreation spot as well as open space, because the property has enough land to put a soccer field on, a full like soccer field.
What property?
Well,
It's adjacent to Walker.
it's adjacent to Walker Pond,
It's all paved or
it's
something?
paved
Oh, I know what you
currently.
mean. Yeah, yeah.
It was part of Raytheon
Yeah,
property.
yeah.
It was originally part of the Gore Estate. The Gore Estate went from Main Street
Yeah.
to,
the river.
I think it went to Pleasant Street. I'm not sure it went all the way to the river.
It did go all the way to the
Went
river.
all the way to the river and went from Gore Street in Waltham all the way to Rutland. So it was a huge expansive property. So Edward Road properties were part of the property at one time. So the pond it may be the largest pond in Watertown. It may be the second. I think there may be one in the Mount Olive Cemetery that may be close to it in size. But it'll be the largest pond. There are two other ponds nearby, kettle ponds, that were formed during the Ice Age. So the kettle ponds, there's no streams going in and out of them. Although they do use it for storm runoff from Waltham. And so I think it'd be nice, we could create a walkway, a boardwalk around the town, and with coordination with Waltham, we can make a walkway all around the pond. And so I think it's an exciting thing for me as for open space, wetlands, so there are wetlands associated with the pond, so it could be an exciting project to go forward somehow. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you. Anyone else have project ideas? Or the other thing that I will ask about is there anything up here that you don't agree with, or that you think, yeah, I'm just curious if there's anything that you feel like there's a tension with.
I'm not sure I saw all of them.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
even know. What was exciting to me was just to see, like, for instance, I just had a couple and that without any discussion or any kind of connection to anyone else, that there's duplicates up there.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
the same ideas, which means that people, like stakeholders from completely different areas, are noticing the same things, either potential ideas or lack of things in town. And that's really exciting to see that, because even in this small group that we have duplicates is great. I mean, it means in the broader town there's other people thinking those things too.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else have project ideas they specifically want to talk about, or questions about any of the projects that they saw?
I just had a thought that my predecessor, Brian Costello, had I think mentioned to a lot of people in the town that there's a bit of an odd issue with the public housing here, because we're the, I think, only subsidized housing in the area that essentially provides housing for this percent of the population. And so Monday, we were at the State House, and Kevin Honan, the House chair on the Housing Committee, was talking about how it's great the Commonwealth created 400,000 plus jobs, but they got 110,000 new units of housing. That's epidemic numbers, So if we have an overhouse situation in our small little public housing that we have, where we have people needlessly in 3 or 2 bedrooms, but we can't take them down to the 1 bedrooms because we don't have them. And then the housing here also has veteran and local preference of public housing, which I know is very popular, I think, right now with the community, because we might be the only housing gig in town that offers that. So that's good for the emergency housing people. But again, I think just to reiterate that there's a solution there. If you build new 1 bedrooms on land that we currently own, which I know is a big thing with the CPA, then it's doable. It's high cost. So what would the cost be? But fortunately, right now we're in a feasibility study that John Lawn was kind enough to get us some money to look at the design possibilities. So we're doing that now, and by the end of this month we'll have a contract with Davis Square Architects to just design what it would look like to build new 1 bedrooms on top of what we have now, and maybe knock down a building or 2. But sensitive issue. It's a veteran housing. But if we built a couple 1 bedroom units, it's not very appealing because it's just a few units.
Right.
But it addresses a pretty big need in the area. So.
Yeah. Great, thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Do you guys have any concerns about the use of CPA funds, or concerns about the way that decisions would be made around CPA recommendations? Anything else that is lingering? Yeah.
Well, so one of the things I'd like to see is development of the Charles River waterfront, so paths along there, so I guess they'll fall under recreation, and for recreational and maybe for commuter use as well, so biking, hiking paths, and just a place to spend time and green space. And so I'd like to see that, and I guess part of me also wonders, I think that fits squarely within Community Preservation Act, appropriate use of funds. But one of the areas I'd like to see is, for example, Little Greeno, which is that little stretch of Greeno kind of behind where the Home Depot is. I think that's a terrific spot, even now when it's actually really not developed. I think that there's a lot of a potential there, but it also occurs to me that maybe the development that's going on over there, that it might get done already. So how to make sure that we're using this to further projects that might not otherwise get done.
Can I add something to that? When I was growing up, and that road was not open to public. You couldn't go from Arsenal Street to Beacon. Wouldn't it be nice if they closed it again and limited access and made it a park?
I would,
I know it's unrealistic,
but I would say we shouldn't be focusing on that because that's a DCR property.
I know it is.
Yeah.
I know it is. Good point.
For us to get CPA
Yeah.
to do a DCR property,
That's not
we're
worth
not
it.
gonna happen.
Good point. But
So I just
nice green.
caution on that.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the process. I think the process that's set up, the way this works, there's plenty of opportunities to present projects to the CPC committee, and then the final okay comes from the town council, who answers to the community as the elected officials. So I think that's perfect balance of how this gets vetted and finally authorized. So I think that once we get going and find a project, I think that's gonna work well.
And I had a question for if they want to investigate the potential for open space like that, they just want to get a small amount of funds for environmental review before they're even submitting the full project. Is the CPA able to just say, hey, this is a small amount of money, it's $5,000-$6,000, we could do this,
So the CPA can use their admin funds to help, I guess, basically with anything that will help inform their decision. So if the CPA chooses to spend their admin funds on like a study or gathering more information to kind of understand the feasibility of something, that is doable, but only through the admin funds. So it can't be used through the category funds, which is just more limited since it's a smaller percentage that they can use for
But
admin.
all of the category fund dispensations have to go through the town council, is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, the only circumstance, so basically, one thing that, for housing, the one thing that the CPC can choose to do is allocate their funds to housing trust. And then the housing trust can take those funds and use them, have more flexibility to use them without further approval from town council. But that initial transference of funds does still have to go through town council. And the same thing can happen, I think you can set up like a specific similar with an assistance program. If you're doing, in Cambridge, they set up a low and moderate income family fund for households that want to preserve their historic homes. So it's a combination of the affordable housing, community housing, and historic preservation. So that's a similar program where they're setting up a fund and capitalizing the fund.
What about, so do you have resources to help us if we're trying to research how to work on the gravestones in the graveyard? We're trying to get a proposal together. Do you have resources to help us to put together a good package?
CPA funds can't really be used for that kind of thing.
But I mean, do you have people that we can talk to?
Oh, yes, absolutely, yeah. So the CPA Coalition has a lot of technical assistance. Not only do they have resources on their website, but they also have, people that you can reach out to and talk to. You can also get, there are people like the CPC and your community preservation coordinator. There are definitely people that have knowledge and can help with that process. But in terms of getting, the other thing that's, that's helpful is to utilize whatever groups you have in the community and reach out to committees and nonprofits and other, organizations that might be able to provide information. But in terms of funding, CPA funds can't really be used for that piece of it.
I think when we get to the point where people are submitting applications, we're going to probably have some kind of seminar, technical assistance event, and then, a case-by-case basis, technical assistance, we'll make that available to each applicant.
Good.
Yeah, and that's, you're mostly talking specifically about the first round, but also ongoing, it's something that, the CPC could consider. Because it's true that it's a lot of work and responsibility for the project applicants. And there's, a lot that goes into that. I just want to check time really fast. Quarter, yeah. So is there anything else that you guys want to talk about? I will be putting together a summary of these focus groups and everything that came out of it, so that you guys will, be able to fully see all of these ideas. But yeah, I'm curious if there's anything else that we didn't get a chance to touch on that you guys want to talk about. One thing I did notice is there's an idea here to build another bridge over the Charles to alleviate traffic in Town Square. Not to call anyone out, but that is not eligible with CPA funds. That comes up a lot. A lot of people ask about transportation mitigation.
How about like a walkway, like an elevated walkway in Watertown Square?
Yeah, we have one down by the pool, and to have another one.
Yeah.
No, I was actually thinking about just across that.
Over the square itself.
Over the square
Right.
itself.
Anything to help that area.
If it's part of a recreational trail network, that is feasible and that's eligible. But if it's just about sidewalks, are not eligible under CPA. So there's a fine line there about the difference between recreation versus just normal transit.
Yeah.
So one of the things, just getting more access to the river. The recreation department once a year brings kayaks over. It's like once a year. We should have something like that going constantly. And I would imagine that would be a perfect thing for the CPA.
Yeah, and one thing, the actual maintenance and programming can't be funded by CPA. It's really the creation or the acquisition or preservation of the space that allows for that programming. So things like, equipment, boats, or, the people to be able to organize events like that. That all has to be done separately. But in terms of creating those access points, that is
Like a landing and boat dock or something that would enable
So
that.
that goes back to what Mark said earlier, that's DCR property. So,
The whole river is DCR?
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we,
How come I didn't know that?
well, they own 50-foot, or at least on where the pathways are.
Yeah.
The pathway that goes all the way from up to Newton
Yeah.
is DCR property. I think they have a 25-foot from the edge of the river all the way pretty much up, and they took the land back. They didn't have it everywhere. They took it where they needed to, so that's DCR property. Oh.
Do they sell?
Well, there's a park we took, you maybe buy from that's not used enough, but
Yeah.
I don't know. They don't usually sell.
Sorry, Mark.
They don't usually sell anything.
No,
They actually own the property that the skating rink is on.
Yeah.
but that's our
They
skating
really-
rink. That's our skating rink.
It's our skating rink, but it's their property.
There's a park right next to it, it'd be nice to
I know that, but it's their property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just a partnership
Mhm.
that we were able to.
Well, so can CPA funds be used to partner with DCR in any way?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if there's a project that.
Yeah, so if they were, willing and on board with the project, yeah, as long as it's open to the public and, yeah.
Canalonga Park.
Huh? Yes.
Canalonga Park.
It's another underused good facility. Catalogna Park is a
So
small.
we've got just,
I'll talk later.
sorry to interrupt you, just got about 10 minutes left, so unless there's any last, discussion points that you guys want to talk about or, things that you really feel like you want to voice as a stakeholder in the community in terms of the preparation of this plan, I would like to move on to our last activity.
Can I just say, I think this program is a great opportunity for the town to enhance our community to benefit everybody in every one of those areas. So I think it's a great opportunity for all of us.
So on the last page of your packet, there's a little worksheet. And this really goes back to the application process and what I was talking about with the CPC's decision-making process and the way that they might prioritize recommendations. So one thing that we're really curious about is if there are any values or guiding principles that you think should really shape and inform the CPC's decision-making process, especially if it comes to having to make decisions between projects that, you know, they can't fund everything. So I'm sure there are lots of ideas out there. Again, this is just an idea generation. It can be something that's really lofty. It can be something that's really specific. And we'll end up going through these and sifting through them more later. But it would be great if you guys could remove this last page and just write down any ideas you have. And again, as you're writing, if you want to discuss any of them or ask any questions, some things that have come up, just to give you an example, is things like projects that leverage additional funding, or you know, like you were saying, projects that may not otherwise be accomplished. And I'm, you know, in some ways you have to think about how the CPC would determine these things, or how a project applicant would demonstrate that kind of quality. But yeah, I just encourage you to kind of think about anything that you think could really help inform the CPC's decision as they consider project applications.
Can I also ask, how much money are we talking about at this point?
It's right now just over 6 million.
And that will grow yearly?
I believe it's about 200,000 a year. Is that correct? It's the
2 million.
or 2 million.
2 million.
2 million or
per year.
so of property tax and the new funding that is being leveraged through the registry. They're trying to get to 30%, so that would be another 600,000. And then there's the issue if there's a budget surplus, they kick in 10 million, 20 million to that at the end. So I think if you guesstimate about 2.5 a year, that would be close.
And so the town can sit on that money if it chooses to?
Yep.
Until, if they're thinking big and want to do something huge?
Yes.
Okay,
They can also use that money to borrow, just so you know.
to borrow.
So you can make an allocation to the town, i.e. the town council, that's on the town council, to say it's a worthy project, and then the payment of that loan would come out of the portion of CPA funding for that particular category. But that, again, only goes through the council.
And that's attractive for investors because it's this sort of secure funding now that they have the CPA that they want to, if you're investing $6 or $8 million into a project, they see that as a very continuous source of income, so they're interested.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm curious if anyone wants to share some ideas that they have.
Think big.
Anything else?
I'll put it down that the first project of projects should potentially try to benefit a number of people as their first big, you know, and then that's just
That's similar to what I put down.
my suggestion.
Build community.
More impact more people. Very useful. Well,
Any other ideas? You want to share?
Nobody sharing.
Everyone's shy because of coronavirus. Maybe it's just been a long day.
I like that think range is good.
absolutely.
It can mean so many things, right?
There's a lot of big things to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see something? I'm Jan Singer from the Watertown Community Practice.
So whenever you are done doing that, like I said, if you can just rip off that back page and just put it up here, I'll collect those. And thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to come out and braving the health risks and everything. I really, really appreciate it.
I think they'll be okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you for that workshop that,
Can get
I want to be
going.
respectful of everybody's
Yeah,
time.
absolutely.
My name is Elodia Thomas. I'm just doing a quickie intro. I'm the chair of the Community Preservation Committee. I can't thank you all enough for coming out. Maria Rose is to my right. She's also part of the Community Preservation Committee. We're here tonight just to learn and listen. You are here all representing different groups in town because we're looking for some cross-fertilization and ideas, etc. Ashley's going to be guiding the program.
Avery.
I'm here, excuse me, Avery, sorry,
It's okay.
switching things here. And Lene is here as our coordinator. She comes from background in MIT in planning and has worked in Franklin Park in Boston and knows a lot about community organization, outreach, politics, and all the hiccups that can go into these kinds of projects. So without further ado, I'm leaving it to Avery. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. So I want to start, I'll give you a brief overview of what we're going to do tonight. I'm anticipating that it might take a little bit less than an hour since we're a small group, so discussion might be a little bit more focused. But yeah, thank you for braving the health risks and coming out. It's really important for this process that we get input from you guys. So I am part of J.M. Goldson's consultant team, and we're working with the CPC right now to develop a community preservation plan, which will basically guide the CPC's decision-making process over the next few years and set the standard for the application process going forward, and really think about some goals and project ideas that the CPA could kind of run with. So I'll start and just ask everybody to go around, and I know we did some introductions as people were coming in, but if you could introduce yourself again, reiterate any interests or entities that you're here representing, and if there's anything in particular that you are either concerned about or excited about coming into this discussion tonight.
I'm Harvey Steiner on the Historic District Commission, and my interest is to find out what the CPA is. So that's it.
I'm Janet Book. I'm on the planning board. I'm on the board of the Boys and Girls Club, and I'm the chair of the Stormwater Advisory Committee. So I'm kind of spread all over. And I've lived here for, I don't know, 40-some years.
I'm Angie Cornelis, East End Town Councilor, and Town Council will eventually be voting on the recommendation from the committee. So I'm glad to be part of the process.
Hi everyone, I'm John Gannon. I'm a town councilor at Longshore Watertown. Like Angie, I will be voting on the recommendations of the CPC. And not only do I serve as a town councilor at my day job, I'm an attorney for a state agency that deals with cities and towns. I've been representing over 100 plus cities and towns for the last 25 years. I got my start in this very office 25 years ago as town attorney in Watertown. But I've been working with cities and towns to implement the CPA since it started. And the agency I work on now, we provide guidance to cities and towns on allowable public purposes for the CPA. So I'm excited to be part of this process and see what you guys come up with as well. Thanks.
I'm Melissa Santucci-Rossi. I'm a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. I've been on the board for about 18 years. Current chair, lifelong Watertown resident. And I also happen to work as the Assistant Planning Director in Braintree, Massachusetts. We have the Community Preservation Act there. Not one of my primary focuses, but do assist that committee from time to time. I'm primarily trying to engage them to do some housing projects, and they seem to be a little bit gun shy on that side. So Very excited to be here, and really glad that I was asked to participate.
Thank you. So the next thing on my agenda is I'm going to go over, actually first of all, it seems like you guys are pretty familiar with CPA, but I'm curious if just show of hands, how many people in the room feel like really familiar with CPA? Like you know a little bit but need to learn more? Okay.
You've heard of it.
Okay. So we've got a wide variety in the room. I'm going to give some just basic background on CPA, on this project, on project eligibility, and then we'll move into an activity. You've seen some of the remnants from the last session that we just had. I decided to leave those ideas up there in case they spark any conversation for us later, but I'll ask you guys to come up with some project ideas or potential project ideas. We'll talk about them a little bit. If you guys have any questions that come up while I'm giving the initial overview, I encourage you to just jot them down and bring them up again during the conversation discussion section. And then at the very end, we will go into another activity that's actually in the back of your packet around values and guiding principles for the application process. So yeah, I encourage you to follow along with this as I go. And you can absolutely take it home with you. There's a page on the back of the agenda for notes if you want to, take that off and take your own notes as you're listening. So I'll start with this page, which just gives a brief overview of our project and where we are. So we started with a kickoff meeting and a tour with the CPC in the fall, and we compiled resource profiles, which are also in the back of this packet. Mostly for you guys to take home and review. If you want to look at them as we're doing the activity later, you are more than welcome to. But it's more there as a resource for you, and it just gives a snapshot of some of the resources in the community within the CPA eligible categories. Right now we're moving on to the really engagement heavy piece of this project, where we're reaching out to the community, interacting with the community. We had our first forum at the end of January, which I hope most if not all of you were at. We have a community survey that's live right now. We also have a project website that's live. I've put the URL up there. So I encourage you to, if you haven't already, to go and check it out. The survey is accessed through that website link. There's several pieces of information to learn more, and there's a few tools that besides the survey that you can use to give feedback and really stay engaged with the project. So definitely check that out. And right now we're doing these focus group sessions to really dive deeper and hear from key stakeholders in the community and town staff. And then we will have a second forum, which originally was scheduled for April 16th, but because of everything that's going on, it is up in the air right now, so we'll be putting out notices when that's rescheduled. But that'll be another chance for the broader community to learn more about the project, hear a little bit about what we've heard so far, and to continue to give feedback, which will ultimately go into the goals and the rest of the plan. So that will be the rest of the summer and into the fall, is really just sifting through all of that feedback that we get. And using that to work with the CPC to come up with some prioritized goals and really just an inventory of potential project ideas that anyone in the community can also use this plan to be inspired to maybe apply for funding. So that will be the remainder of the project. The next page gives an overview of CPA funding and how it's allocated. So you'll see that there are 3 categories on the side. For funding purposes, open space and recreation are lumped into one category. Historic preservation and the community housing. So the annual revenue of CPA funds, 10% must be either spent on or set aside for each of those 3 categories. The remaining 70% is then available as unallocated funds or undesignated funds that the CPC and the community can decide how they want to spend those funds. The one little piece that is included in there is that the CPC can use up to 5% of funds on administrative costs, which include things like the CP coordinator, community preservation coordinator, updates to the plan, consultants for updates to the plan, or other administrative costs that might come up. And I'll talk a little bit later about other eligible costs for this admin fund as well.
I just have a quick question. When we do appraisals and things, we take it out of the administrative
Yeah,
funds,
so that's
right?
what I was going to say,
Okay.
is that they're, I'll talk about it in a little
Okay.
bit. It'll make
It
more
depends
sense
on when
later.
the appraisal is done. So, well.
Okay.
Go ahead. You've got a lot of experience with this.
So appraisals, if the town is thinking about acquiring a particular property, the appraisal could be done, to put it on the list of items. Appraisal could come out of the admin or during the property acquisition itself.
Right, that's typically
That's
when we.
And open space plans can be funded by the admin budget as well, so it's kind of cutting edge.
So are we paying your fees out of that now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the next page, this gives a nice little graphic overview of what a typical application process looks like. So the first step is the idea for a project, which is really a big part of what we're doing right now, to just generate these ideas that then anybody could run with. Step 2 is, I would actually say there's maybe another step that should be in between step 1 and step 2, and that is identifying the project manager and the person that is going to be applying for these funds. Someone has to take ownership of that project and really be the person to see it through. A lot of people think that the CPC is the entity that initiates the projects, and so people feel frustrated. Frequently they'll say, well, why isn't the CPC coming up with housing projects? But it's really because a third-party entity has to be the one to come to the CPC with that project idea for the request for funding. So step 2, or step really 3, is to, if the property is not owned by the applicant, to get that agreement and permission from the property owner. So for example, a neighborhood group might see a vacant parcel in their neighborhood, they're not sure who owns it, they want to turn it into a pocket park. So they figure out who owns it, they go talk to the owner and get that permission to go forward.
Is that a rolling process, or are there dates for putting in proposals?
Yeah, so usually there's a set amount of time that is really leads up to the final decision about funding allocation. So it gives many months for project applicants and the CPC to work with project applicants to understand more. And we're still ironing out the details. Communities do it differently, but there usually is a specific time frame for when the project applications are due, when they're considered, and when those recommendations are made. So step 3 is to apply for those funds, fill out the application. Usually it's a 2-step process where the project applicant can come to the CPC with an idea, figure out, is this eligible? Do you need more information? Kind of work through those details, go back, flesh out a full application process or project application packet. Step 4 then is that the CPC will review and discuss and vote on the project applications, and those votes lead to a recommendation to town council, which then provides the final vote on that funding allocation.
So do you anticipate in Elodia to be almost like rounds, and then the applications are kind of weighted against each other?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's something that we'll get into in the last activity, but that is something that the CPC is really going to be focusing on later in this project, is figuring out exactly how that process is going to look and how they're going to make those decisions, because it's true that some rounds they might get just a few applications and be able to fund everything. Sometimes they might get too many projects and have to make decisions about what to fund, or sometimes they might have enough funding but just decide that they would rather save those funds for future projects and feel that specific project is not a priority at that time, but there does need to be some sort of criteria in place to inform that decision-making
And
process.
also to borrow for long-term for a bigger project. like a
Yeah,
20-year
yeah,
borrow.
yeah, the CPA can bond, that's,
Yeah. Town bonds.
No, we-
CPA can recommend.
Yeah.
Council, that's
Yeah.
on the council.
We haven't told our committee that.
So if you flip to the next page, this is a matrix that actually the CPA Coalition put together originally. This is Newton's version. They've added some more details, some of which aren't really relevant to you guys in this community, but for the most part, this is a very, very useful tool. I use it all the time. It's really hard to remember what is eligible and what isn't, and it is, really a work in progress. It's not really black and white for everything. There are a lot of, discussions ongoing. There's a handful of, cases that have come up that have really provided clarity on some things, but there are a lot of things that are still just kind of unknown and that people have to talk about amongst themselves to really understand what is eligible and what isn't. So you'll see that open space and recreation are separated out on this matrix, and that's really just because there are different allowances for those different uses. So I'll start with community housing, which is housing for households that are at or below 100% of the area median income, which is higher than the standard set for qualification to be listed on the subsidized housing inventory, which is 80%, at or below 80% of the area median income. Communities can decide to restrict their community housing supported by CPA to that lower threshold if they want to, but to just point blank be eligible for CPA funding, it's that 100% of the area median income. So that's a decision that the CPC will also be wanting to think about going forward. So CPA funds for community housing can be used to acquire a unit, whether it's by purchase, by gift or donation. They can use CPA funds to create, so to just build or construct a new housing unit. They can use CPA funds to preserve a housing unit, which is either preserving the affordability restriction or protecting it from injury or harm, which really is about protecting the lifelong integrity. So CPA funds can't be used for maintenance. So for example, if a housing unit needs, a roof replaced just for annual or regular maintenance purposes, but there isn't any real threat to the building, that isn't eligible. But if there's a giant leak in the roof that is making that unit uninhabitable or potentially uninhabitable for future residents, that is eligible.
Do I recall correctly that at the forum there were some dollar amounts associated with this below 80%?
Yeah, and those are updated every year, so I didn't want to include them just because it varies year to year.
Currently?
But I don't know off the top of my head. I forget what they are.
113.3, Angie, is the annual area median income for a family of 4 currently. So to qualify for the subsidized housing, it would have to be at 80% of that 113.
I think it's like 88, 9, 82.
Yeah, you just do the 80% of it, right?
Yeah.
So it's close to 90 grand.
Yeah.
So, but it changes every year.
It does, yeah.
They've gone up a lot past couple of years.
And the region goes far.
I know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Upton or something?
We are in the Boston metro region, so that we are considered Boston, Quincy,
Yeah.
Watertown is all part of
Yeah.
that. It's a very expensive
That
region.
goes up to like Upton or something.
It's big.
It's a big region,
It's
yeah,
big.
for sure. It's really big. So CPA funds can also be used to support community housing, which is a unique piece just for community housing. So this includes like direct assistance to those households. So it could be a rental assistance program, a buy down program. These funds can also be used to hire a housing coordinator if the community doesn't have a housing coordinator, things like that, and which is really unique for that use category. In addition, CPA funds can be used to rehabilitate or restore an affordable housing unit as long as it was acquired or created using CPA funds. So any affordable housing units that exist right now in the community would not be eligible, but if any of those housing units are acquired by using CPA funds in the future, or new ones are created, then they would be eligible for that in the future. And that's rehabilitation is really about capital improvements and improving the longevity and integrity of a unit.
In my experience, I feel like the maintenance, rehab, and restore gets we see a lot of people wanting like maintenance money, essentially, and it gets very gray, and then we go to the Stuart Saginaw and his crew, and use them as a resource to try to determine whether or not what category it falls into.
Yeah, and that's something that I will say with CPA is that a lot of those discussions happen, and a lot of these details and figuring out really if something is eligible comes during the application process. Right. It's something that often we just need more information. So at this point in the process, we're really just trying to get ideas on the table. And there are some things that we obviously know at this point can or cannot be eligible, but that is something to just keep in mind, that there's a lot of discussion around this stuff still. So moving on, historic resources, which the description is here, but it's a building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact that is either eligible for or is currently listed on the State Register of Historic Places. If it is not listed, then the local historic commission can write a letter basically saying that this resource is significant in culture or history. And it has value that really warrants CPA funds being used to protect and preserve it. CPA funds can be used for acquisition with historic resources, for preservation, which again is about protecting from injury or harm, or for rehabilitation or restoration, which is not surprising. Open space, which includes a lot of different categories of land and natural resources. CPA funds can be used again to acquire, to create, to preserve, or again to rehabilitate or restore if the property was acquired or created using CPA funds. So we were talking a little bit before in the last session about how these kinds of projects are not as common, but they might include something like a cleanup of invasive species, or other restoration measures to improve and restore natural habitat or open space and natural resources. What did you say?
I said stop a development. Oh, okay.
That's really about acquisition or.
Has it ever been used for like toxics cleanups?
I don't know off the top of my head. I assume it's toxic
Toxic
cleanup. I don't know.
I haven't heard.
I'm not sure, but I do think that would probably fall under restoration if it was, if there was documentation of its prior state and wanting to bring it back to that.
As long as it was acquired with CPA funds.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So you'd have to acquire it first, or would the property initially have been?
You have to acquire first. And now, in order to do, we have to.
But knowing that it's toxic already.
Right.
Yes.
I'm thinking like someone's pond.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'd probably anticipate that in the cleanup cost when you're considering acquiring it.
Right. Yeah. So finally, recreational uses, which is really about outdoor active and passive recreation. So CPA funds can be used again to acquire or create, to preserve or to rehabilitate or restore recreational spaces outdoor and lands for passive and active recreation. What CPA funds cannot be used for is indoor recreation complexes, stadiums, artificial turf, or horse or dog racing. But they can be used for dog parks. So dog racing.
You can build a pool, but you can't build a building over the pool.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
yeah, it's all about outdoor recreation.
Do you ever get into conflicts where you're preserving land that then flows into DCR property or state property or?
What do you mean? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, for example, if you were doing some measure that involved going to the river, and most of the riverfront is DCR property,
Yeah.
but you were doing something that was to preserve, or restore river quality, water quality.
So that wouldn't be eligible because the property would have to be acquired or created using CPA funds. But if it was about creating recreational opportunities, it would be about a partnership and working with DCR to figure out if, that's something that they would support.
Okay.
All right. So that concludes my piece. But if I want to check first if there are any other pressing questions before we get moving on to activities. All right. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I will hand out little sticky note pads, and I'll just ask you to take a few minutes to silently write down any project ideas you have. It can be either something really specific or something that's a little bit more vague. You can also just write down a need related to any of these 4 categories that you know exist in the community. If you don't have, if you know that it would be great to have more parks, but there's not a specific location that you can think of for that park. It's fine to come up with things like that too. But just jot down your ideas. I would recommend writing 1 idea per sticky note, just so that we can keep them separate. And then I'll ask you, as you're ready, I'll ask you to post them up here on the 4 boards. Just go with your gut on which one you think fits best. Sometimes projects fit into multiple categories, and that's okay. And then while you're doing that, I encourage you to look at not only the ideas that are already up there, but the ideas that everyone else is coming up with and posting as you go. And if there's anything that you think is a really good idea that you didn't, think of on your own, you can add a little star next to it. You'll see some of them have that, just so that we know that it's an idea that multiple people in the room, really support or think is a good idea. So I will set you to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to add one thing, while you're thinking of these ideas, I want you to use your expertise and your in the CPA categories and your knowledge of Watertown to really think about ways to leverage resources, overcome some of the obstacles that there are in Watertown with regard to, the great deal of development. There's not a lot of undeveloped land, so everyone wants to acquire open space, and there isn't a lot available to acquire. So how can you forge partnerships with other entities or leverage the resources that are available?
I have a quick question, sorry. Andy.
No, go ahead.
And I was thinking along those same lines, Lainey, I'm saying what can we buy, and what opportunity is the committee gonna have, because you can only pay the appraised value, and we all know that everything here has the price has no correlation to the appraisal. And I started thinking about maybe identifying, or I don't even know if you can do this. Can you buy a house and tear it down and make it a pocket park or something like that?
Yeah.
We've done dual purchases, where we've bought a house that was adjacent to a resource area, and we split it, and half of it was open space that was joined to the resource area, and then we sold the house as a first-time home buyer. But I wasn't sure if you could actually purchase a house and tear it down and make a pocket park or something, just in a densely populated neighborhood, just to kind of create an area for
Good
children.
example, before the CPA, the house that was across from the old police station.
That's correct.
We tore it down to make it as part of the eventual community path. So that was acquired.
Yeah.
That could have been spent with CPA funds acquired.
Okay.
So
I
we
wasn't
bought
sure.
it.
Because that would be an
Just for now.
acquisition and creation. You're, acquiring but then creating.
Yeah.
Or if we bought it and made it nice for affordable housing. that would
Yeah,
be
yeah,
wonderful
that
housing.
that part, I just wasn't sure if you could like
Yeah.
say like we're gonna,
Yep.
okay.
And a lot of people do what you were saying before. A lot of people do like to combine
Right.
different categories as much as
Mhm.
possible. So people will, redevelop an old house for affordable housing, or whatever, build new houses in one portion of a parcel and preserve the rest for open
Yeah.
space, or create a pocket park or something that's open to the public.
Like I have one of my ideas is to acquire Walker's Pond on the Waltham border. So part of it is in Waltham, part of it is in Waltham.
Have you talked to Leo?
Pardon?
Hasn't everybody?
No, I used to play pond hockey there as a kid. We used to capture frogs. and
Okay, John, I was
snakes.
next.
I
Thank you. This might be a stretch, but in the East End, we have a need for parking associated with the park. Can we do anything of that sort, purchasing a parcel of land that could be utilized for a park?
I've seen
You
that.
might know more about this.
Yeah.
Parking, I've been talking to Jen about this a little bit too, my boss. Parking is one of those kind of gray area things. It's definitely been done before, and there's nothing out there so far that says this is not eligible. I think especially if it has to do with providing like handicap parking, or providing enough parking to accommodate a new created use, or like if you create a new ball field and the existing parking won't accommodate that, I think that kind of stuff is eligible. But if it's really just like a repaving or something like that, that's a little bit
Might have to throw something else in. Yeah.
Yeah, my office approved a
Well, we
plan.
can be creative.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Oak Bluff said, we approved a project that had, a big park acquisition and parking to allow
Right.
people to get there.
Right. So it's
Right.
usually in conjunction with, the creation piece.
Yeah.
But if it's a public parking lot, for example, that would not be an eligible purpose, that would be supplanting town funds.
Well, what I was thinking about, Angie, was
Yes.
the parking lot that is Mount Auburn's remote parking lot that's near Philipello Park.
I'm sorry, which parking lot?
I think it's along Grove Street, where the community gardens are on Grove Street. It's kind of carved out of the aggregate.
You talking about crossing the cemetery?
Yeah, across from the
Next to
center.
that little house?
There's a huge parking lot,
Yeah.
which is remote parking for Mount Auburn Hospital. I
Yes,
think.
yes.
I walked past that the other day, I'm like, why don't we just like cram all those cars into a garage and have
Well,
some more
that's
open
the
space?
parcel that we're talking about
Yeah.
that BB&N wants to purchase. Remember I
Okay,
sent
yeah,
that out?
Yeah.
Okay, what I'm thinking of is this parcel that I really can't talk about because we mentioned it in executive session and I sent it out. I don't know if you're aware of that. It's a strip of land that's in the area of Philipello Park. And it's within, a stone's throw that can be utilized for,
Privately owned, no?
but the assessed value is really not that much. Can't talk about it, but it's in the area. Okay. I was told by legal counsel that I really can't divulge the exact location.
I'll go buy it tomorrow.
Walk by and go, that's what Angie's talking about.
That's why we can't talk about it.
Well, I did send
I
it
don't see
out,
what
I
you
just
see,
sent it
Josh.
to you because you weren't a counselor at that point.
But I would be wrong.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, be careful about that there.
And is there much so this kills me. Apostrophe S.
No, it's always just a sleep.
We know the town had the opportunity to purchase those. Those ponds.
I didn't know that.
Purchase what?
Declined because of the, what?
The purchase what property?
Stallings and Williams ponds. The town declined years ago because of the
Contamination.
The cost, yeah. I dealt with those funds back in the day.
That's what that is.
Try to prevent development from getting too close to weather.
Max asked me, why doesn't Diane Proctor like me?
I was part of the Conservation Commission. I represented the Conservation Commission with Max. I won my first trial, defending Sauron's Pond.
Really?
My first, my first run for town council, Max sent me a check for $100. And you know, I don't accept political contributions. So I mailed it back to him, and he was horrified that I would do that. He questioned me, well, why did it? And his son said, well, she doesn't accept. You know, he was adamant.
So I will say that after this, we'll engage in some discussion about these ideas. So I definitely encourage you to look at the ideas that are up there as thoroughly as you can in this time that we have right now before we start discussion, so that if you have anything you know, that seems like a really good idea, or anything that you don't agree with, or anything that you might prompt a question about eligibility or anything, I definitely encourage you to look at those.
Staging is correct, but if you go over my house, now, and he's still trying to do it. He will not get out of his fence.
You're like trying to fall over, it's okay.
It's too aggressive.
I love these pens. I coughed on mine, taking it.
Decades ago. There's so much going on because of like the top.
How's the hat?
You what?
Those are the HACs.
Oh, really? You're down a couple floors down?
Well, I'm sitting there, I'm like, is that Ken Woodland? And then I texted you, I was like, this is like the, yeah.
The Watertown row.
I know, and then you wrote, and then I was with Carolyn, I go, I'm gonna go over to the Watertown floor, and she started laughing. She got to take the whole building.
Walked towards when she was chair of the Conservation Commission. God, for decades.
Not good at historic.
I don't know
He was just so tough
what our historic needs are.
Yeah, that's not my,
The Fowl House could use a paint job.
And he's still trying, he's always.
yeah, it's, I just, like,
Better maintenance. No, maintenance, rehab. That actually wasn't acquired through CPA funds. So what can we do with the Fowl House? Or my house is almost 100 years old. We could make a plaque or something.
Yeah, but mine is too, yeah. I had a very exciting evening, cutting open my knee wall in the attic to install a squirrel trap.
Oh gee.
All right, so it seems like everybody's put up their ideas. So now I just kind of want to open it up for discussion. Were there any ideas that you want to talk about or clarify further, as much as we can, if there were ideas written by someone else in the previous session, maybe we won't be able to, but, or if you have any, were there any projects that you felt like were, you know, a really good idea that kind of caught your eye as you were looking?
Well, I've been collecting a trail from Charles River to Main Street over the years, and initially the Stop and Shop on Pleasant Street, I worked on the planning, the zoning when I was an attorney in the early 90s, and they carved out a walkway from Pleasant Street to the Charles River. It's alongside the
Entry.
When you and I were, Melissa and I were on the zoning board when Repton Place was approved, and I asked for a trail to be set aside by the developer to connect that part with eventually to Waltham Street. When the Waltham Street housing development was created, they created open space on the side, a trail system on the left side. There's one space in the middle that would connect that trail system. Then we could maybe get an easement, or from Gore Place, we could walk all the way from Leo's house to the river. So, I mean, it'd be a nice amenity to be able to have a continuous walkway like that.
Anything else? Yeah?
One of my true passions is housing and affordable housing, and really understanding sort of the needs of a community, and I'm not as tuned into Watertown's demographics and incomes as I am in the community I work in, but I think it's just a general, I think people make a lot more money than they do, and I don't truly think people are 100% in tune with the needs of our population, and or how can we provide other opportunities. Working in the planning field, there's tons of things for people under 30% of the area median income. There's a lot of things for people between 70 and 80, all our affordable units, any LIP units, any comprehensive permit units. And I personally have seen that sector there between 70 and 80, it's such a fine line between, can you afford the mortgage, can you still live, and it's an interesting sort of area I think that they're targeting, and sort of looking at, you know, I don't want to say make jokes, but I did some, I was doing a LIP application today actually that I'm getting ready to send into DHCD, and this is a 2-bedroom unit, and I have to be at or below 80% of the area median income, and the mortgage was going to be like 17 and change. And you start to look at these numbers and really looking at them and wondering, you know, can these people truly afford this, you know, if they have school loans and cars and kids and things like that. And while there are things that serve that population, on my particular sticky, I find that people that are at 100% of area median income, or even at 110 or 120, that those people are not eligible for those programs, yet they can't really afford a house in Watertown. And is there a way for us to do either a buy-down program where they pick out the house, it would be a substantial subsidy, understanding the real estate market here, but that they would deed restrict that unit. They obviously wouldn't be able to sell it at market, but if they ever did sell it, then it would be passed on to another eligible entity. So people earning, you know, $115,000 or something like that, being able to purchase a house for $400,000 or maybe even a little bit more instead of, you know, $850,000. And then also any opportunity for first-time home buyer assistance. I find that that's really, when you're at a certain income, and to be able to save for a down payment and live and do what you need to do in life, you know, the days of a $20,000 down payment, well, down payments now are $100,000, $150,000. So is there any way for us to try to open up some opportunity for people while they're paying their school loans and doing other things and trying to get good jobs and make good money? Is there an opportunity for them to break into Watertown? And I mean, I'm in my mid-40s and none of my friends live in Watertown. I was fortunate enough to inherit a house, and they all moved, you know, and now they're all like, oh my God, now I have families, and they're like, I would die to be in Watertown. That's where my family is, that's where my sisters are, that's where my parents can help. And it's just, it's, you know, I know a lot of people say this, but to me, it's sad that people can't afford to buy where they grew up. And I know that that happens everywhere, but if we have some money that can provide some opportunity for people that are working and making good money, and it's sad to think that, you know, looking at the situation that we have today, that, you know, people making $115,000 are just, you know, I mean, that's strapped if you have a family. It's really difficult to get ahead. So I think, you know, we've met our safe harbor for the land area, and it's great if we do provide additional units at that 80%, but I typically find it's more like between 30 and 60 need help, and then between like 90 and up to 120 are really populations that you know, should have an opportunity to get into the market, and if we can provide that.
Or percentage restricted in the CPA per.
Yeah, you can only go up to 100. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, staying with community housing for a bit, I identified a couple of sites that would be potential sites that could support, you know, a 2 or 3 family unit, or maybe a little bit more. Both in the East End. One is actually owned by the Housing Authority on Nichols Ave, and it was formerly a community garden until a couple of years ago when it got shut down because of rats. So that's one site that would easily support a 2 or 3 family house. And then on the corner of Mount Auburn and Boylston Street, there's an abandoned gas station that's been an abandoned gas station for a long time, which is potentially another location where something could happen, and I don't know the details of how.
They don't want to sell, that's the problem.
Is that next to the library?
The next, yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay. We've been after them.
It's a library, then that little office building,
long.
then the gas station. In St. James.
One thing I will say too, this brings up a good point, that I think it's really easy to get caught up in the restrictions of the present day, and, you know, the knowledge that a property owner doesn't want to sell, or really high land prices, but you never know what will happen down the line. You know, an opportunity might arise, and so that's part of why we really like to keep things open for these kinds of planning processes, is that, you know, something, basically the horizon of this plan is really only 5 years, but it's a basis that will continue to be built upon for years to come. So I think it's, you know, it's really great to identify any opportunity you see, whether or not it might be actually feasible. So yeah, it's just something to keep in mind.
I'd like to keep our seniors here. You know, we talk about young families wanting to move in, but residents who have spent their entire lives here and cannot afford to continue staying in Watertown, especially, you know, if it's now become a one-person household where one of the individuals has passed on, and it's difficult for these people to pay the taxes and everything associated with the maintenance of the property, and it would be devastating for them to move. And what can we do for these, you know, townies who have been here for decades? And my second is land acquisition. I think it's important. It's a means of, you know, not stopping development, but actually enhancing our communities. I speak about this one strip of land that's in the Philipello Park area, and then there's another one at the corner of Belmont Street and Templeton Parkway that's open green space right now, and I'm very concerned about development of that parcel, because the entity is on a roller coaster the last
Is the church?
The last number of years in that green space that we've known for decades. We don't know if that entire parcel would be developed. Could we purchase the green space and make it a pocket park? These are options.
How would you help the people that want to stay in their homes?
Pardon me?
How can this be used to help the people that can't afford to stay in their homes?
Yeah, I mean, if they fall under the, you know, the restrictions of being at or below the 100% of the area median income, you know, they could be assisted either through like a direct assistance program, if they did decide to move to a smaller unit, they could be eligible for like rental assistance programs, or they could qualify for new affordable housing units. And some housing units are restricted for
That's
seniors.
moving
It's
She
moving
was
them, but
talking
it
about
could be
people
moving
wanna stay
them
in their
within the
home.
community.
What she's talking about, people wanting to stay in their home, that's what I'm just trying to, I mean, I know that's a concern, and that's.
It's a
something
major
I'd like to-
concern, and I don't know how we
That's why
can
I'm
do it.
asking the question.
I don't have the answer, throwing it out. Bless you.
Yeah, I think it would probably be through a rental,
No, but this, it wouldn't.
or a direct assistance program
Through the
for
CPA.
homeowners.
Through this,
Mhm.
okay.
There is a program
But-
in Watertown for people who can't pay their tax, they can defer their taxes. And then upon death or upon sale, they have to pay the taxes out of the sale of the home plus 4% interest per year. So the town has made accommodations for people.
It's a state,
That's
it's a state
been there,
exemption.
that's
Yes.
been there, that's
Yeah.
been there. But that's not necessarily the avenue that everybody wants to take. But,
Yeah, I mean,
people
something
are
to
asking,
consider.
well, what would you do if your taxes are all of a sudden in excess of $10,000 a year?
That's tough on a fixed income. I mean, I see mine going up, and I say the same thing.
We all do.
How do people on a fixed income, how do they manage this? And, if they don't have somebody in the house with them, whether it's a child or a relative, helping them with the expenses, that's a concern. I share that concern as well. It's just a tough one to, when it's not a rental and, something like
yeah.
a TBRA program, that's tenant-based rental assistance program. I don't want to get off track, but I have just a quick question, or two quick questions. Does somebody know how much our home allocation is? So we get home money, we get HUD home money in Watertown that can also be used for housing activities. And then my other question is does somebody know how much land the town actually owns?
It's in
Off the
the,
top of my head.
It's in one of these.
it's in the flyer. they
Okay.
have.
Probably in here.
You mean the town owns or a housing authority included with that, or?
No, like
state?
not like what would come out of the one point, just like the town, like what does the town?
I have a listing somewhere.
Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, I think the stats that are in here are specific to each of the categories. It's not an overall total for what is
We have a
town.
listing of all the
Yeah,
parcels.
the
that the
assessors
town-
would have that. Certainly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that brings up a good point to, think about collaborations and other sources of funding
Exactly.
that CPA can, use or partner with to serve communities. But it's true that the community housing is kind of a tough one for supporting people staying in their own homes, especially because of that income, threshold. So it's not, it could be possible. It would just take some creativity and some thought
Yeah, just
to
something
think
to
about the
be
best way to
explored.
do
It's-
it.
It's a question that comes up all the time.
Yep.
And what the council recently did about what you're talking about is we reduced the interest rate.
Yes, you did.
Any other thoughts on any of these project ideas or CPA in general?
Well, I put a idea in community housing. Let's see, there aren't a lot of congregate living facilities and folks with intellectual and disabilities, and because it's hard for nonprofits to find property that they couldn't afford to live in Watertown, so they couldn't afford to find properties in Watertown. But there are definite needs of people who grew up here, who are town residents, who would love to live in town. Not that we can't restrict to locals only, but it would be nice to, but there is a need for the town, and folks who are working 40 hours a week and just need a little guidance.
Like an adult group home?
Adult group home,
With
with
services?
some supervision.
Yeah.
We have quite a few.
Yeah, we do.
We do, but it's hard to, they've been around for a while, and it's hard for a new group to come in and pay Watertown 2020 prices.
But there are, as the Housing Authority owns some, and I know Beaverbrook owns and operates some. I'm not sure how many in Watertown, but I know that they do that because they have some in Belmont.
And Till also owns.
Yes.
Based on our group home number in the 1.5, which was I think half an acre, I don't think it's too many parcels. Yeah, I think it was 0.53 acres was the number that came back from DMH and DMR for our group home allocation, which is
In Watertown?
yeah. I was shocked.
That's all?
Yeah.
Wow. So
Yeah.
there's a need.
Yeah.
All right.
I'd love to hear a little bit about historic and any ideas that you have, sir. That's an area that I'm not overly versed in, and
Well, I'm on the Historic District Commission, not the Historical Commission.
okay,
And the Historic District is right around, it's Mount Auburn Street from just the first house at Starbucks and the other side of the street up to just past Walnut Street where the dry cleaner is.
Mhm.
And it's just the frontage on all the houses on Mount Auburn and down Marshall Street and Paulford, the next one past
yep.
Common Street.
So you just
One
look at changes to structures in the district and whether or not it's appropriate. Okay.
If people want to make a change, they have to come before a hearing. And some are more critical than others.
But we could use, and correct me if I'm wrong, we could use this money to fix up some of those structures.
Those are private.
Depending
They're all
on what
private-
it is.
They're all privately owned.
Yeah, that's okay.
That is the one thing that is you know, a little bit interesting to figure out with CPA funds is that there has to, it has to be, funds have to be used for public purposes. So if it's entirely a private residence that, doesn't serve any other public purpose, it's a little bit harder to justify that use of the funds.
Okay.
Even though it is a registered historic resource.
Yeah.
Because it's, taxed income taxes from the public that are then being used for public good instead of private purposes. So it's a
Even if you put the restriction on it and like all, because
There's a whole thing that goes along with that. Like the Pratt House, that's right there, that's restricted because they got money, the previous owners got money for it. And so that's on there's a higher authority than us.
Did the doctor sell that house?
Pardon?
Yeah.
Did the doctor sell the Pratt house?
Yeah.
He was like the braces guy. I don't know why I gave him money. The guy was printing money in that place.
No, the current one, the current person, Tangretti, I can't remember his first name.
Is he an
he's a good
attorney?
guy. Pardon?
Is he an attorney?
Yes. He's,
Now, we have a historic district, but nobody knows it's a historic district because
Well, I've
there's
been
no signage. And I know that you had mentioned that in your reappointment.
when I went to I just got reappointed to district.
That's why I'm picking up on your sign comment.
Right, and they said, well, signage, but I've been, I don't even like to talk about it because I've been talking about it so long. I designed some signs and I'm not the most productive when it comes to getting things beyond the point. But when they did want to put some money into funding this year and whatever, for the whole plan.
Okay, for signage,
Yeah.
wayfinding.
So I think that, and actually, I got approval to do signs, it's just, and walked along with Gideon and somebody from Public Works. See, I just haven't, I over-designed it, it's a lot of work, and, but I would like to get it done before I leave the commission.
Going back to your question about restrictions, though, I think that's something that is a gray area, and trying to figure out exactly how the restriction does protect that use, but there's still not that public benefit or open to the public piece that would be missing from CPA funds being used for a private residence.
The only one, I'm sorry.
No.
The only one I think would be the Val House. That is owned by the Historical Society, but that would be up to them to try to, I don't even know if they qualify, because it's privately owned.
How long? Is that a townhouse?
No, what?
Not owned by the town?
No, it's something like that. They tried to sell
Oh, by the
it.
Historic Society. Oh, yeah, they would be eligible.
They actually, years ago, they tried to sell it to the town. The town didn't want it because he was in such a state of
Yeah,
disrepair.
so we got.
That's why I bring this up, because I find that the societies, they have no money, they can't even maintain their own buildings. I know where I am, they're always hitting the town up to pay an oil bill or do this, or we can't even keep the heat on, the pipes, like, so
Well,
it's.
this is perfect funding for.
Well, that's what I mean. I'm like, what good is the resource if it's not preserved? You know, that's the way I look at it, anyways. And if there's opportunities to improve, you know, maybe not putting a new kitchen in the place, but you know, the exterior appearance and the historical significance of that, if it's in the district.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, it's part of what it's one of the. It's a good part, a major part of Watertown.
Right.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, if all of those houses all of a sudden looked like you know what, then the district you wouldn't want to put signs up because you wouldn't want anyone to know that's the district. All right.
Well, we used to be able to fund churches, but court cases have restricted that for CPA funds. So you got this beautiful church in the heart of a New England town green, and so there's been some court cases late about using CPA or any money for
It's just really, you have to be really particular and careful about what the CPA funds are used for if it is a church. I do want to be, you know, conscious of timing. It's 8:30 or later at this point. So the last thing that I'm going to ask you to do before we leave is this back page in your packet. If you want to tear off that piece and just jot down a few ideas before you head out. One thing, as I mentioned before, that the CPC is, you know, really going to think about over the next few months is the application process and how they're going to make decisions and weigh project applications. And so, what we're asking here for is just, again, brainstorming ideas about like overarching values or guiding principles that might help inform that decision-making process. So an example would be projects that leverage, you know, X amount of additional funding, or projects that fall under multiple CPA categories, or projects that, you know, serve at least X number of people. And these ideas can be, again, I just want you to put any idea down. We'll be continuing to refine them and go through them as we move forward with the project. So don't feel restricted, but do think about how would someone in a project application demonstrate how they meet this value or this guiding principle. So that's just meant to keep in mind as you're thinking about ideas. And when you're done, I'll just ask you to put them up here or hand them to me, and then you can go on your merry way.
Public-private partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely, that works.
You're also talking about, Janet brought up the issue of DCR. So would that be, how would that come into play?
Say more about what you mean.
I think she means the land is owned by DCR, and how can CPA funds be used?
So that
So it
would
would have
be a
to be some
private,
kind of
public-private, that would be.
Well, access to a DCR, you know, say a private
Yeah,
property.
another government entity.
Right.
We could do projects on a DCR property.
Yep.
For example, the federal
Yeah, it doesn't
park.
have to be owned by the town
Right.
to do work with CPA funds. You just have to then have permission from that property owner for the project to go forward, if they are not the one themselves applying for the funds.
Okay. All right, so that would not only be for a private property, but also for another government property?
Yeah.
Or another community? Would be community?
I mean, another town?
Yeah, no funds can't, if it's with.
No, the regional CPA projects like the
William, not Williams, I'm in the East End. Walker's Pond.
Walker's Pond is on Waltham.
Oh, okay, yeah,
And for example, there's a project on Martha's Vineyard where the 6 vineyard towns contributed money to move a lighthouse from falling into the ocean due to.
I mean, so could Watertown work with Waltham?
Yes.
for
Oh, sure.
Walker's
Okay.
Pond?
Elaborate.
Yeah.
That was my suggestion with Walker's Pond, we combine with Waltham. Then Belmont's doing these new bike paths, the community, the metropolitan, whatever it is, but we could supplement it with Watertown property, jumping on there, giving access, for example.
Okay. I'm good.
All right. Let me take that from you. Thank you.
Can we keep the subsidy materials?
Yes, absolutely. That is yours to take with you. Okay. And again, I'll remind you to go to the website, take the survey if you haven't already.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you for coming again. I really appreciate it. Yeah,
Stay well, everybody.
Stay well,
Yeah.
stay safe.